And that's why we like our history, because there's no anxiety in history. Ed Dorn, the American poet, said that there's no anxiety in the past, there's only anxiety thinking about the future. And so when we go and we look at history, we can learn from it and hopefully apply the lessons. And one of the great guests on our show is Avellina Balestri, all the way from Maryland, who is an expert on the American War of Independence, or as I like to call it, the American War of Separation. Please welcome Avellina.
Hi, Alistair. How are you doing?
Doing well tonight, Avellina. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you once again for having me.
Yeah, for another round of your fascinating historical speeches about lectures, as it were, about British soldiers who fought in that period in mainly the 18th century. And who are you going to talk about tonight?
So tonight I will be talking about Major John Andre from the American Revolutionary period. I know last time we said we were going to do Sir Hugh Mackay, but maybe next time. But the reason why I began to think Andre would be more appropriate is that tomorrow is his death date, on October 2nd. So to start off with Major John Andre, as you had mentioned before the program started, when we first mentioned him, you were saying his name is French, and that's very true because his parents were actually immigrants. They were Huguenot refugees. His mother was actually born in France. His father was born in Switzerland, but he came from the wider diaspora of the French Huguenot community. So, in brief history, there's a lot to it. There were a lot of religious tensions, persecutions, and wars up and down Europe. And in France, in particular, the effects were felt by the French Calvinists, who were the Huguenots, who often tangled with and were often persecuted by various French Catholic monarchs. And it depended. It went back and forth. You also had Huguenots who were involved in risings themselves, as well as, massacres against Huguenots. But it was very, very difficult, the point is, to be a Huguenot in France during this time period. And so quite a few of them immigrated to other parts of Europe, or to the British Isles particularly, became very welcoming towards French Huguenot refugees under the houses of Hanover, actually, very much so. So you see that with regards to George II, and George III continued this policy of being very welcoming to them. And they also settled in various parts of the colonies, the American colonies, and there's lots of people with descendancy from them. And when you think of like Paul Revere, for example, his name also has that French origin. So these were all descendants of kind of the French Huguenot refugee immigrant population that spread out across different parts of the British Empire. So it is one of the things of the movements of peoples. I kind of say it all started when Adam left the Garden of Eden, and it's been going ever since. And so,
well, it seems to have been speeding up recently, at least in my neck of the woods,
definitely.
Anyway.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. There's, and it kind of goes though. It's been through all time when you get down to it, and as we're talking about now, with this sort of fits and starts, and different things happen in world events, and different people, set off looking for new security, new opportunities.
Yeah, what's interesting with John Andre, as we say there, he just to locate him in his time period, he was born in 1750 and died a young man in 1780 under traumatic circumstances, which I know you're going to tell us about. But he was an example of what you just mentioned there, immigrants who very much appeared to have integrated into the British cultural way of things, to the point of fighting for the British army. as it were. But please go ahead and tell us more.
Certainly. So yes, so John Andre was reared mostly in London, and as a young man, he ends up joining the army in the aftermath of kind of a failed romance, actually. So he kind of does the, French Foreign Legion thing where it's like, I will go and join the army. And so he does that. His father was quite a prosperous merchant at the time. So he could have gone into, and he did for a little while assist his father with that end of business, but he kind of wanted to get out of town for a little while with regards to what happened, and also he genuinely seems to have been attracted by the prospect of honor and glory and chivalry connected to the armed forces and a military commission. So he ends up in North America during the American Revolution. He serves in Canada for some time and ends up captured by the American revolutionaries. And he's held as a prisoner for some time, and there's all kinds of little stories about that. I'm not going to go into great detail, but he's held as a prisoner by different people. He's moved around a lot. Treatment varies, but in the good side of things, the good treatment, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for example, he ended up housed with a family. And becoming quite close with the family. We have lots of charming little stories about him, like playing marbles with the kids and stuff like that, going fishing with the kids, becoming quite close with their then eventually teenage son. And basically he really plugged into them, and various other people that he made a good impression on. He was a very charming, vivacious, creative, artistic person. Someone who I've always connected to because I think we share a personality type in terms of like ENFP, very kind of extroverted and creative personality type. He, did a little bit of everything. He was a dabbler. He loved art and music and all kinds of arts and crafts and making things, theater and literature and poetry, and he was just full of all of these interests, and you see it throughout his life. Wherever he was always involved in artistic projects of some type or other, and he was very big on sketching and drawing, and he would carry around a sort of art kit effectively of a sketch pad and so forth with him, where mostly where he went, and people who knew him well would say he had this kind of sing-song warbling voice and would hum tunes under his breath and things of this nature. And
those qualities then mark him out for what he eventually became, which I know you'll mention, which is basically a spy, a kind of secret agent almost. Am I correct in saying that?
An intelligence admin. So
okay.
So I think that's distinct from being a spy. And this becomes a whole thing later on. But he, at this point in time, right? So after he ends up getting released, so he gets, there's an exchange, there's a negotiation, and he is released back to the British Army. He ends up serving on the staff of General William Howe. He ends up down in Philadelphia. And he becomes, again, renowned very much for both being quite an effective young officer under Howe. He's good. He's very he's good with both work and play effectively. He's very diligent when it comes to the work end of things, and being that kind of assistant and aide figure for the general. And also he, takes part in all of these social endeavors in Philadelphia. And he is involved in also various night raids and battles and skirmishes as well, both when he was in Canada and, I'm just going to kind of give a very brief summary because I can't go through it all. But basically he was involved in different things. He was involved in night raids. He was involved in actual warfare, the point is. So he did these sort of night raids and skirmishes and things of that nature. But when he was back in Philadelphia, he spent a ton of time amidst the loyalist Americans who were there, who had gone there basically for safe haven once the British Army had occupied the city. And so he spent a lot of time with them, became very good friends with a lot of them, including one young lady who will play a role later, Peggy Shippen. And so he kind of played the field with the loyalist ladies of the city, and he dated around and was famously just doing all kinds of activities with them and taking them on sleigh rides when winter hit, and doing theme parties and all of this stuff, and drinking huge amounts of tea. They said even for the period, he was like a real highly caffeinated individual, effectively. He's just constantly downing tea, cup after tea, cup after tea, and so it just added to his energetic personality. And he opened up in Philadelphia this turned a warehouse into a theater, and starts, producing all of these plays and things of that nature, and so forth. The social event that he's most famous for is the one that he helped organize, this huge thing, when William Howe was going to be recalled to England. So Andre creates this lavish, I mean, he and other people, but he was the head of it. He was the motivating feature and organized a lot of it, and sort of set it up. This big thing that basically was in part like a Ren fair. So he resurrected jousting, basically, and he participated in the jousting, which is pretty awesome. And so he created a whole little sketch of things. He organized the costumes, and he had all the ladies dressed like Turkish women, because he was inspired by these medieval sort of descriptions of medieval court celebrations that you would have in France.
And so getting back though to his like actual military activity, which led him to his demise, can we
we'll hop up to New York. So that was the famous thing he did down there. Then up in New York, he ends up in New York. So in New York, he ends up on the staff of General Henry Clinton, who may have been one of our boys, in the sense of Clinton may have been born here on this side of the pond. It's a bit debated, but anyway, he ends up on his staff, and so he serves him in that capacity. And he gets involved in various different things. One of those things is yes, the admin intel work with regards to British intelligence. And so that's part of his work. Otherwise, he also is involved in things like prisoner exchange, etc. So while on the one hand, he's processing, for example, actual spies who come in and they get information to him, and there's codes and so forth. And he does a lot of the desk work and the back and forth with those spies that are sent out. And, because he's an admin, that's his job, is admin position. And at the same time, he's doing things with regards to prisoner exchange. Now, when it comes to the prisoner exchange element, he has a pretty good reputation. I mean, obviously, prison situations at this time are never very good, especially for randos who are not officers. And the British prison ships were pretty infamous for a reason, especially up in New York. But he has a fairly good reputation. And one brief story that highlights this is, then this was recorded by the people who were involved, of the two kids. I mean, I say kids, but they were like 14 or 15. They, on impulse, jump in with some revolutionaries who were going off to fight the British, and there was a skirmish, and they get captured. They get taken to New York. They're going to be put on a prison ship, and the likelihood of survival is just pretty low. And so it turns out one of them has a panic attack, effectively, and this young British officer, this is the person who had the panic attack is describing it later. This young British officer comes over and looks at them with compassion and is like, what is it? And he's saying, I was just with my family happily earlier today, and I will never see them again. So this young British officer gets moved. He takes the kid's hand and says, man up, don't cry anymore. And then he turns to the guards and say, don't touch these two until I come back. And he goes off. And then the guard basically says, so then the young kid, the teen says, who was that? He says, because he's the only person here in this group who's looked at me not like an enemy, but like a brother, and looked at me with compassion. And he said, you should thank your lucky stars, the guard says, because that was Major Andre, and he's probably gone to go beg you off to the general, like he's done for so many of your other rebel kind. And so Andre comes back, and he basically says, well, I've got good news. I've got good news for you. So the general told me that I can essentially have possession of you to do whatever I want with you. And what I want is for you to run away. So he basically says to them, and then he gives them this little, according to the kid again, he gives them this little mini sermon, effectively, which was just in a way strange. for some people to think about, because Andre got very into party life. You know, he kind of has a reputation for various affairs and being in this sort of party swing of things. But he was also raised by a pious Huguenot family, and he was religiously educated in Geneva. So this has a sense. So he gives him this little effective sermon, which basically is, you know, go home, fear God, keep the commandments, love one another and your family, and the Lord will bless you. Now go. And so they do, and they survive, and they live to tell the tale. So that's that. And then, you know, there's the real famous thing, which I don't really want to spend a lot of time on because it's so done to death. But effectively, Andre gets into communication via Peggy Shippen, who is kind of, you know, one of the many loyalist girls he'd dated back in Philly. She's now married to the Revolutionary General Benedict Arnold. And so it turns out Arnold is not too pleased with his experiences in like the Revolutionary service at this point. Keep in mind, I would say this, Arnold was not a very good person, period, no matter what side he was on at what point. He just wasn't. He was very much out for Arnold. Whatever Arnold thought was going to benefit Arnold, Arnold did. So Arnold essentially has decided, hey, maybe it would benefit me more to go back over to the British side. So effectively, he is communicating now, Andre, as the intel admin, is communicating in code with Arnold about this possible transaction. And what does Arnold want? Well, Arnold wants loads of money. And Arnold also wants a commission in the regular British Army. And he wants a position at court, the royal court. So, you know, he wants pretty much everything he can get out of this deal. And in exchange, he will help the British capture West Point and potentially George Washington himself. Hey, that could really help winning the war. So they kind of agree, hey, yeah, this dude sounds like he's got some important things. We don't care if he's a skunk. He can give us important things. So and of course to them, I'm like, which I'll convince that. So anyway, so then he ends up, yes, going to meet Arnold. He goes to meet Arnold. Arnold has hot paperwork. Arnold essentially says, hey, man, I'm not going to carry this hot paperwork. Once the ship they were supposed to meet. So we're supposed to go together to meet this British ship and get out of there. But then the ship got kind of forced to back off and go away once the revolutionary guns opened up on them. So they get stranded there. And so Arnold is like, hey, man, I'm not taking that. Sorry. And so Andre now is going to have to be the one to either leave the paperwork on the table, or he's going to have to pick it up and take it himself. But he's stuck behind enemy lines at this point. He was just supposed to go as a negotiator. He wasn't supposed to do this. And so then Arnold, because he's Arnold, says to him, buddy, why don't you change out of your uniform so you'll be less likely to be caught? And he says, well, that's a terrible idea. I shouldn't do that. Because, of course, being caught out of your uniform, you know, on the books and in the letter of the law, you're technically considered a spy, even if you didn't go intending to be a spy. And he's like, I don't really want to take that risk, man. And so, but Arnold is like, well, you either do that or you leave the paperwork here. So you got to make a decision here, buddy. And so Andre eventually is like, okay, I'll do it. And so he does it against his better judgment. And down the road, there's like all kinds of stuff that happens. Like literally, he gets a guide to try to get him from point to point. And the guide recalls that like Andre talked his ear off about everything high speed, which I'm just like, yeah. And he's just talking about like art and music and stuff. And I'm just like, that would be me. There is no question. And so he's finally thinking he's almost out of the situation. But then he gets stopped on the road by these guys who are basically like, in this time period, everything like order was a bit devolving. So you kind of had outlaw brigand type people who were like flavored one way or another. So they were either flavored patriot or loyalist, right? So these guys jump out at him and it looks like they may intend to rob him. And so he nervously decides, hey, I assume that you're one of us. And he just starts to chatty Cathy his way into oblivion and basically gives himself away to these outlaws who, for some reason, a couple of different things, like the way they were dressed, he thought they were loyalists. They aren't. Yeah. They're patriot-flavored brigands. So they take him in. They find the paperwork on him in his boot, basically. And so it's like, okay, things are going very, very wrong now. And so he ends up being taken in, and he has now been caught out of uniform, and the big Arnold plan is just completely down the tubes now.
Well,
But Arnold has gotten away.
To cut a long story short, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, but what then happened to him as a consequence?
Right. So, as a consequence, he gets brought before a board of inquiry / tribunal. It's all a little fishy, but suffice to say, they condemn him as a spy. They throw out of court his efforts to make an extenuating circumstance plea. He isn't represented by any kind of proper legal counsel either. So he effectively is toast meal before he even gets in there. Because the thing is, they wanted revenge. That was really what it came down to. Even if he could have had the best extenuating circumstance case in the world, and I personally think he did have a reasonable case, at least to try to make, he was never going to get the chance to properly make it, because the fact is they needed to have somebody that they could punish for Arnold being a traitor. But the thing is when you start to pick that apart, certainly from, if you're looking at it from the loyalist perspective, it's like, right, so these guys who are all traitors on this board, like they are saying this one guy who was one of our traitors is now a traitor to our treason, and we want to punish this other guy who didn't commit treason of any type. Okay, so that's basically what happened. So they end up saying, we're going to hang John Andre unless the British turn over Benedict Arnold. And so the Clinton really wants Andre back. He's close with him. He's friends, but he can't do that because that would really put a very bad precedent. So what we end up with here is that Andre beseeches at this point. He thinks, okay, I'm toast. They're going to kill me, but please don't hang me. I just shoot me. Don't hang me. Both because he clearly was a bit concerned about, the strangulation elements, but also because he thought it would be a disgrace to his family. And so he begs them, please don't just shoot me. But no, they're going to hang him anyway. So then the lead up, I'm going to just try to wrap. And then in the thing, they basically get him on the day of it, and he goes out and he sees the scaffold, and he has something of a mini panic attack where he gets shuddery and has struggled to breathe. And this one guy next to him is like, why this sudden emotion, sir? Which I think is the most annoying thing ever. And then he's like, I was accepting of my death, but I despise the mode. But he calms himself down enough, and he self-talks himself through it, and he's like, it will be a momentary pang. He's just going to have to believe this. And so he goes up there onto the scaffold, and he puts the blindfold over his own eyes, puts the noose around his own neck, and he makes this speech, which, again, brief summary of it is essentially, I am dying. Since I am dying for my king and my country, I must consider this the hour of my death, the most glorious hour of my life. And, I pray that you all bear witness I die like a brave man. So, he does. And fortunately for him, his neck snaps. It was actually a momentary pang. It was a quick exit. So that happens. And then afterwards, it is said that they found a hymn that had been written by Andre in his own hand. It was an English hymn that he had penned, it seems, the night before from memory. I'm just going to read briefly that, and then I will be done. So it's a hail sovereign love which first began this scheme to rescue fallen man. Hail matchless free eternal grace that gave my soul a hiding place. Against the God who built the sky, I fought with hand uplifted high, despised the mention of his grace, too proud to seek a hiding place. Enwrapped in thick Egyptian night, and fond of darkness more than light, madly I ran the sinful race, secure without a hiding place. But thus the eternal counsel ran, almighty love, arrest that man. I felt the arrows of distress, and found I had no hiding place. Indignant justice stood in view, to Sinai's fiery mount I flew, but justice cried with frowning face, this mountain is no hiding place. Ere long a heavenly voice I heard, and mercy's angel soon appeared. He led me on with gentle pace to Jesus as a hiding place. Should sevenfold storms of thunder roll and shake this earth from pole to pole, no flaming bolt shall daunt my face, for Jesus is my hiding place. On him almighty vengeance fell, which must have sunk a world to hell. He bore it for a sinful race, and thus became their hiding place. A few more rolling suns at most shall land me safe on Canaan's coast, where I shall sing the song of grace and see my glorious hiding place. Exalt the Lord, his praise proclaim. Let every saint now raise his name. Forevermore we'll see his face, the face of Christ, our hiding place. So that was the hymn, and then he ends up years and years later. He was buried on the spot afterwards, but years and years later, he ends up, his body moved back to Britain and to Westminster Abbey, where he has this beautiful, a beautiful marble, tomb basically to his honor, and it was raised in his honor by King George III.
Yes.
He had a great deal of affection for the king, and the king had a great deal of affection for him, as we can see. Loyalty, nodding to loyalty on that one.
Absolutely.
So there it is.
Just upon that, that's a good way to finish today. That's the memorial at Westminster Abbey, and it says, "Sacred to the memory of Major John Andre, who raised by his merit at an early period of life to the rank of Adjutant General of the British Forces in America, and employed in an important but hazardous enterprise, fell a sacrifice to his zeal for his king and country on the 2nd of October, 1780, aged 29, universally beloved and esteemed by the army in which he served, and lamented even by his foes. His gracious sovereign King George III has caused this monument to be erected." So I was surprised when I saw that he even had that, because I had never heard of him before. Interestingly enough, I've heard of Benedict Arnold, because
Andre deserves the fame so much more, and it's a tragedy to me how it seems like most people who've heard of Andre know it from really bad pop culture depictions of him, like in Turn, AMC's Turn, where they have him say, "I'm not dying for king or country, I'm dying for a woman," and other idiocy. So I just want to say, don't listen to Turn. Do not trust Turn to give you a good impression of Major John Andre. He was vastly better as a human being, way more based. Like, please don't believe Turn.
Okay. Well, great stuff as always. You've introduced another British hero to our minds and awareness that we did not know, a Huguenot of all people, who fought very patriotically for the British, but unfortunately got himself into a bit of a sticky situation, whereupon he was considered to be a spy and hung by his neck, which is an unfortunate end for a chap who was only 29 years old and no doubt thought he was doing the right thing. So that's just what happened. So TC says here, Benedict Arnold is buried in a church in Battersea, southwest London. I did not know that.
Yes, he's buried next to a fish tank. He's buried next to a fish tank, funnily enough. I've seen pictures of it, and it's sort of like, I think it's a Sunday school now, that area, and there's a fish tank right next to it. I'm like, well, there's worse things, there's worse things than being buried next to a fish tank in a quaint sort of English Sunday school room.
Absolutely, you get around at the end of the day, even in death. But okay, Avellina, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alistair.
Remains for me to say, you do have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/@ Avellina Balestri. For those of you listening on audio only, that's AVELLINA BALESTRI. Lots of interesting stuff there, including your
There's a version of the hymn, Hail Sovereign Love, on there as well. There's a version of that on there if anyone's interested.
Oh, really? Well, what we'll do is when we put this, we'll put the full interview up next week, and we'll include a link to that song. Thank you for telling me. It doesn't surprise me that you've turned that one into a video as well. So, folks, just that's Avellina. No doubt you'll be back on with new people in the future. Always glad to.
We'll get back around to Sir Hugh Mackay.
Absolutely, we can do. Okay, Avellina, have a great rest of your day over there in Maryland. Bye-bye.
Bye. God bless.